Hello and welcome back to the Shape Your Success channel with Hay Legal and the Law Society of Scotland. I'm Emma Flood from Hay Legal, and today I'm joined by Dan Kayne, founder of the O-Shaped Lawyer. Hi Dan, how are you?
I'm all right, thanks Emma, thanks for having me.
Thank you very much for joining us. So we'll dive right in. Your project's all about urging lawyers to be more O.
Yeah.
What does this mean? What does this mean for the profession? And how did you kind of come up with the idea?
So there's a lot in there, Emma, so I'll try and take you through some of the background to where this all came from and what we think the Be More O type of campaign is all about. So my day job has been for the last 6 years as General Counsel within leading a big function at Network Rail, the UK Rail Infrastructure Manager. And as part of that, I interview people regularly for roles within the legal team. And I noticed as interviewing people time and time again that I was listening to lots of technically brilliant lawyering when I was interviewing people, but not sufficient understanding either of the breadth of skills they had or really what was motivating them, what their real passion and purpose was. And when you're in-house in particular, but it shouldn't be exclusive to in-house, it's so important to bring people in who you know can engage with your business colleagues, who don't know what lawyers really are all about, don't really care too much for the law. They want help in solving business problems, and that requires a much broader skill set than simply being a technically gifted lawyer. And as I started to ask questions with other peers about whether they saw similar kinds of instances in their own interview processes or people they came across in the profession that was still so devoted to the study and practice of law, and as a result lacking the breadth of human skills, or they're more commonly called soft skills, but I prefer human skills or business skills. And it was an overwhelming, resounding yes, they see this problem. And so I started to bring together a small group of GCs to see whether or not we could think about the causes. Why is it that as a profession we're so focused on black letter law and not all of the other attributes that make someone a far more effective provider of services? We noticed that education played a really big part in this. Legal education was very focused on transactional black letter lawyering without really thinking about the impact of that on the end user and the customer experience, for example. That requires a whole set of different skills to be able to deliver the highest quality service. And so as we started to build out our thinking and we brought more GCs into the round tables we started having, we interviewed lots of general counsel and produced a report back in February 2020, which really highlighted what we had expected, but was encouraging to see some of the leading in-house lawyers say, which was legal knowledge is a given. Those lawyers we want to work with and recruit, understand us, understand our business, and create value for our business. And that's taking lawyering, I think, from what we traditionally know it as to a completely different level. And so what the O-Shape has been about is really accelerating that shift from traditional transactional black letter lawyering to being a much more holistic service provider, well-rounded. And that's where the O of O-Shape comes from, to represent the well-rounded lawyer who is capable of learning and practicing a whole range of different attributes that the GCs we spoke to felt were critical for really successful lawyers in the future.
Yeah. So in terms of having more O-shaped lawyers in your business, what shift can this have for businesses and clients, both kind of in-house and as private practice?
So if I think about the in-house world that I've operated in the last 15 years, it's a really challenging role, not only because, as I say, it's important to know the law, but also to be able to embrace the other skill sets that your business colleagues need, want, and expect. In-house has I think, an additional challenge when you are literally with your clients or customers, as we prefer to call them, or even colleagues, which would be even better if we're starting to recognize how close we are associated with the business. They have a perception of legal. And I think this is across the board, that really, do we have to bring legal into this conversation because we want to move it forward quickly? Or we think legal might overcomplicate things, or they might be too risk averse. And that perception might be, in some cases, perfectly validly held, but I think also represents a stereotype of what lawyers traditionally have been. Whereas if you're in-house in a much more modern and progressive environment, you are thinking about the human interaction with your business colleagues, and they will see you, as we've always said, as people first, then lawyers. That allows you to build up much more trust. And when we hear so much about the in-house role being that of a trusted advisor, it requires much more than just being able to give legal advice. So these skills will enable a much closer working relationship with the business. As a result of that, the lawyers will be brought in earlier, identify problems, help with solutions earlier. And all being well, I expect at the end of that, you'll find that the business will have far less complex and difficult legal issues that could have been dealt with earlier that the legal team only finds out about later.
Yeah. And do you think there's a lot more appetite for this now? Do you think lawyers are kind of starting to see that they're being, left behind in terms of this kind of skill set, or that businesses are asking more from their lawyer?
I think the idea of in-house lawyering being business partners is a phrase that was coined and has been in place a long time. I think the reality is no one's really tried to understand truly what that means, and in particular, the skills that are required to make that happen. What we've brought to light with the model that we've created as a result of those interviews is a really clear framework that will enable people to build those skills in order to be a truly great business partner and colleague to their in-house business experts. I think the real change in terms of momentum for the O-Shape has been the pandemic. I think people have reflected on their own individual purposes and what really matters to them. That reflection, something that lawyers often don't get time to do because they are so incredibly busy all the time, has allowed them to take that step back and think, what do I really want and what skills do I want to develop to be the very best I can be? And I think that's been a real accelerator of what we're doing.
Okay. Could you tell us a bit more about the framework? Like how, if someone is wanting to be this kind of positive change in their firm or in-house, like what types of things should we be looking at?
So when it first started out, Emma, we looked at two things: mindset and behavior. Mindset is, for us, the starting point. If you don't have the change mindset, that growth mindset, the ability to believe that you can be better at what you do by hard work, dedication, and a willingness to learn, then the behaviors for change kind of become irrelevant, because you're not in that place where you are willing to engage with a much more complex environment around you and willing then to shift your thinking. So we start with mindset, and that's really been about our 5 O's that started this all off: about open mind, about opportunities, ownership, optimism, and originality. Those 5 O's are the things that set our framework for a mindset. And if you have a mindset that recognizes you as being someone that's open to new ways of working, open to new perspectives, is willing to be original in their thinking and be much more creative, it takes an optimistic outlook. Positivity is something that really is contagious and enables better and healthier performance. Add into the mix then this idea of lawyers taking ownership of their own careers and the issues they're resolving. And I think finally that idea of looking out and taking opportunities that come, that mindset is a real starting point. We then moved on to the framework, which we're much more commonly now sharing in a kind of development sense, which is, well, what are the attributes that constitute, that make up that O-shaped lawyer? And they came out of the interviews with the 18 leading GCs, and they broadly fit into 3 buckets: building relationships, creating value, and being adaptable. And within those, there are sub-skills. But essentially, those 3 buckets, if we work hard and practice those in the same way as we work hard and practice the black letter law, will create a much more rounded lawyer. And
you do have a kind of education stream. Do you think there's a lot more, space in universities for teaching this type of way of thinking?
100%. I mean, if I think about the work that we've done with law schools, certainly in England, there is a real opportunity when lawyers come together in that bottleneck of law schools in England. I think what we see in other jurisdictions is that the teaching approach might be slightly different in terms of the structure, but the content is largely the same, and it's largely focused on the academic side. Now, you compare that to business degrees, And you see that there's a whole world of difference between what business experts are going to be learning in their business degrees and legal experts are learning. And that's because they are thinking about how is what they're learning relevant to today's world. Whereas I think within law degrees, we're looking at what's the foundational legal principles that you need to then later on go and practice. And of course, that's critical. I go back to the point that legal knowledge is a given. You have to have that. But there's so much more to it. And until our law schools and our universities start to recognize that the world has shifted a lot over the last 10, 15, 20 years. And if as a profession, we're not training our lawyers for today's modern society and even the next generation to come, we're going to continue to fall backwards. And so I think at the moment, we're very traditional, transactional and black letter law, which is essential, but is the foundation. We need to build on that foundation and give people the real employability skills that they need to be successful in their career.
Yeah. At Hey Legal, we actually have quite a lot of student followers who watch our CPD. Do you have any advice that you would give them on how to be more O-shaped as they're kind of starting out their careers?
Start with the mindset. Start with thinking where and what really matters to me. Go back to that individual purpose and your own values, because what you don't want to do that I see so often in our profession is that people end up falling into the profession. I did it myself 20 something years ago. I never really felt at the time I was going through university that I was desperate to be a lawyer and I wanted to change the world from a perspective of the law. If I had my time again, I'd be thinking really clearly about what matters to me personally. What is it that I really value? Now, I found this very late in one sense with the O. But once you have that, that can really shape your thinking about the opportunities you look for. And that's essential, taking that kind of responsibility to look for opportunities. They don't just fall on your lap. And then be able to find the right thing that works for you. Because if you can't follow your own value proposition, you're always going to end in something that doesn't quite do it for you. You might be happy enough with it, but are you really getting something out of it that you passionately believe in? And I think that's, for me, would be key.
Yeah, and that's what makes the best lawyers, I suppose.
It does.
Yeah. So what comes next for the O-shaped lawyer? How are you moving this forward, and how can more people start to buy into this?
So we ran a series of pilots, Emma, where we brought in-house and private practice together in a very different way to the traditional lawyer-client firm relationship. And that allowed us to have small groups from in-house and private practice, really sharing and being open about how they felt about the relationship, what was working, what wasn't, what does good look like, how do we get there, what are the barriers to that. And what we found over the course of 6 months, meeting every 2 weeks for an hour, just how much their relationship and conversations transform. Yeah. Not surprisingly, when you put smart people in a room together and ask them to share a bit more than they traditionally are allowed to or feel empowered to, then they start to be much more creative in their thinking. And we took those pilots, which again, we've produced a report on our website for that shows what's possible. And the idea for us now is using the bigger and growing GC community, heads of legal community, senior in-house lawyer community, is to build that community so that we can have a much more collective approach and therefore influence the profession in this way. Added to that, because we want to involve everyone, we've developed the Futures Board. The Futures Board is a critical step for us in engaging with the next generation, or certainly the junior people in the current generation. And what they're able to do in a way that the steering group for the main board, if you like, is really understand the issues that people going through the education system now have, so that we can help at the leadership end to bring real change that's meaningful for those coming through. So the work streams that we've got with different GCs are going to be able to allow us to build out some tools that will be really valuable. And from there, I think that will build this collective approach. That's one of the challenges we have within our profession, which is that we see lots of great individual practice, but there is a huge amount of leverage if you get the buyers of legal services in particular coming together and saying, what do we want from the money we're spending that's really fueling this profession? And for me, that will start to move into much more about responsible business and both corporates and law firms around the ESG agenda, and how do we demonstrate that it's not just about profit. Profit is a real and important mandatory outcome, but from our point of view, it's about people. Get the people right, customers will follow, and finance will be the output. And at the moment, we start with finance, what's our targets, and everything else has to fit in place. We're starting with people, and we believe strongly, and there is very good reason to do that, that finance and profitability will follow, and it almost certainly increase in the long term. So that's what we'll see a shift from us really engaging the community to now starting to try and then influence the profession industry more widely to start thinking people first. So there's more on that on our LinkedIn page. We have a group there that people are very welcome to join, where there's lots of discussion around these kind of things. The website's there are some reports on there. And with the Futures Board kicking off, they've now set up their Instagram page. So worth having a look at that.
That all sounds very exciting, a lot on.
There is.
And we'll share all the details of that when the video goes live as well.
Thank you.
We are just about out of time, but thank you so much for joining us, Dan, and for sharing all of your insight.
Thanks, Emma, for having me. I appreciate it.